Welcome back. 7 past the hour. Email from Andre. Did you see Boner and his wife at the luncheon? No, I didn't. The bile coming up their throats was obvious. He looked both drunk and depressed during the inauguration, and then he and his wife couldn't even look at Obama and Michelle. I did notice Boner and Eric Cantor during the inauguration ceremonies. Cantor was sitting there with his mouth hanging open like a 12-year-old, which is where most of these people are in Arrested Development. I mean, you get some hysterics like Beck and the rest of these freaks. Arrested Development indeed. But going back to Dr. King, I mean, just for the hell of it, Glenn Greenwald now writes for The Guardian of the UK, and of course he had a piece today. Glenn writes that Dr. King emphasized that his condemnations, King's condemnations, extended far beyond what was going on in Southeast Asia. King said, quote, "The war in Vietnam is but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit," end quote. And King insisted that no significant social problem here, whether it was wealth inequality or gun violence or racial strife, none of it could be resolved while the United States remains, in King's words, quote, "a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift," end quote. He said that was a recipe for certain spiritual death. And for that reason, King argued, quote, "it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war," end quote. And that's when King said, if America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam. King also said that working against U.S. imperialism was, quote, "the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than nationalism, and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions," end quote. And of course, for Dr. King, opposing U.S. violence in the world was not optional, it was obligatory. He said, quote, "we are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy," end quote. If you get a chance, you ought to listen to an audio of that, or at least read it. It is It shows clearly why the power in this country decided at that point that Dr. King had to be silenced. And exactly 1 year later, irony of ironies, he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. That's simple. Bada bing, bada boom. You can't have someone with the moral authority of a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. traveling around the countryside, especially not in New York City. Maybe in East Kneecap, Mississippi, Dr. King can make his civil rights speeches, but to go to Manhattan and give a speech about American aggression and imperialism and murder and death and mayhem? No, yo, Dr. King, not here, not that. Go on back to Alabama. Go march. Yow. But as Glenn Greenwood pointed out today in The Guardian, Barack Obama's grand inaugural ceremony took place on the holiday memorializing King's birthday. And Greenwald writes, Obama will always be linked in history to King because his election and re-election as America's first African-American president is, standing alone, an inspiring byproduct of King's work on racial justice. But this symbolic link has another less inspiring symbolic meaning, which is Obama's policies are a manifestation of exactly the militaristic mindset which King so eloquently denounced. And as Greenwald points out, Obama has always been fond of invoking King's phrase about the fierce urgency of now. King's phrase. Yet, ironically, that phrase is lifted from this April 4th, 1967 Riverside Church speech. A speech that stands as a stinging repudiation of the continuous killing and violence that Obama has spent the last 4 years unleashing on many countries around the world. And as a sidebar to all this, Max Blumenthal suggested that Obama's second inaugural speech be entitled, "I Have a Drone!"
That's funny.
And as Greenwald writes, what I always found most impressive, most powerful about King's April 4th speech is the connection he repeatedly made between American violence in the world and its national character. Endless war wasn't just destructive in its own right, but is something that ensures that America's, quote, soul becomes totally poisoned and fosters spiritual death, perpetuates the malady within the American spirit, and elevates the Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them, end quote. And in sum, to pursue endless war is, quote, to worship the God of hate and bow before the altar of retaliation, end quote. It's hard, it's hard to take. It's hard to, you and I weren't taught this. Dr. King wasn't taught this. He grew up in the American public school system. It was only through his own work, struggling for equal rights in this country, and then the broadening of Dr. King's consciousness, as happens to anyone who is serious about equal rights. You cannot work for equal justice in this country and deny the imposition of injustice that corporate America imposes on the rest of the world through the use of the United States military and the United States government. You can't do it. Well, I guess you can, but you're a fraud and a liar and a coward and a freak if you do. You are either honest or you are not. There's no half. You can't be partly honest. Come on. I mean, come on. But this irritates the hell out of me every single year. When the King birthday commemoration rolls around, the trivializing of King's core issue. His core issue was justice. And by trivializing, I'm certainly not denying. It's not my place to deny or not deny the power of King's activism where it concerned equal justice or the attempt at equal justice for African Americans in this country. But King's message was so much bigger than that. And isn't it interesting that year in and year out, that part of the message is ignored?
Sister,